The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are when I drive to the hardware store in town, pick up whatever small thing needs fixing around the house, maybe stop for coffee at the diner on Route 9 where they still know my name. It's a routine I've kept since I retired, a way of giving shape to days that could otherwise blur into one another. I was pulling my jacket off the hook by the door when I noticed the envelope on the floor beneath the mail slot. No return address. My name handwritten in block letters that were trying too hard to look casual. I almost left it for later. I almost didn't open it at all. Inside was a single index card. 6 words printed in the same careful block letters. He is not who you think. No signature. No explanation, just those 6 words and a photograph. The photograph showed my son standing outside a law office downtown. He was shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, both of them smiling the way people smile when something has just gone their way. The timestamp in the corner read 3 weeks earlier, the same week my son had told me he was in Chicago at a sales conference. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at that photograph for a long time. My name is Arthur Covington. I spent 31 years as a senior forensic accountant with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Seattle. I have looked at more fraudulent documents, falsified ledgers, and fabricated paper trails than most people encounter in a lifetime. I know what deception looks like. I know what it smells like. The particular combination of overconfidence and small inconsistencies that marks a person trying to construct a reality that isn't real. I had not applied any of that knowledge to my own family. That was my first mistake. My son, Gregory, was 42. He'd moved back to Tacoma 4 years ago. After his divorce, he said he needed to get his footing back, and I had offered the guest room without hesitation. I was glad for the company after his mother passed. The house felt large in ways it hadn't before. Gregory had always been decent company, easy to talk to, quick with a joke, the kind of person who fills a room without crowding it. His girlfriend, Renee, came with him 3 months later. She was polite, careful, the kind of careful that I had always read as shyness. I understand now that it wasn't shyness at all. Within the first year, Gregory had borrowed $14,000 for what he described as a licensing issue with his consulting business. He needed to move fast, he explained. These things don't wait. I wrote the check without asking for documentation. He was my son. 6 months after that, he mentioned a real estate investment, a warehouse property in Renton, that was going for a fraction of its assessed value because the seller needed a quick close. He needed $40,000 to secure his share. I transferred it from my savings. I told myself these things were loans, not gifts. I told myself there would be repayment. There wasn't. I set the photograph down on the kitchen table and picked up the index card again. He is not who you think. Whoever sent this had weighed their words carefully. Not he's lying to you or your son is a fraud. Just that single open-ended statement. It left room for me to discover the specifics myself. I did not go to the hardware store that Tuesday. Instead, I drove downtown to a coffee shop I'd never been to, one where no one knew my face, ordered a black coffee and sat by the window thinking. 31 years of following money had taught me one foundational principle. The lie is never the important part. What matters is where the money went and why. Gregory had taken $54,000 from me over 3.5 years by my rough count. That was before I checked my records. The actual figure, once I spent an afternoon going through my files, was $61,200. Some of it had gone in amounts small enough that I hadn't mentally logged them as significant. $1,000 here for car repairs, $2,500 there for dental work that his insurance allegedly wouldn't cover. The small amounts are the most revealing part. They indicate practice. Someone who takes large sums is bold. Someone who also takes the small ones is systematic. That evening, Gregory and Renee came home around 7. They made dinner, something with pasta, and we ate at the table and talked about nothing in particular. Gregory mentioned a project at work. Renee asked if I'd watched the game. I smiled and answered their questions and watched their faces, really watched them the way I used to watch witnesses under deposition, looking for the place where the performance showed its seams. I found it in Renee. She smiled just a fraction too quickly when she passed me the bread. Her eyes flicked to Gregory for just a half-second too long. It was the kind of micro-coordination that happens between people running a shared script. You don't notice it unless you've spent decades watching people try to appear natural when they aren't. I excused myself after dinner, said I was tired, and went to my study. I wasn't tired at all. I spent the next 4 hours pulling apart the last 4 years of my financial records with the same methodology I'd used on corporate fraud cases in my career. I documented every transfer, every check, every cash withdrawal I'd made during periods that coincided with one of Gregory's requests. Then I cross-referenced the dates against what I could remember and what I'd written in my desk calendar about his stated reasons. The patterns were damning. The business license issue that had cost $14,000 occurred during a period when Gregory had no registered business entity in the state of Washington. I checked the Secretary of State's database online. His consulting firm, which he described as growing steadily, had been voluntarily dissolved 8 months before he told me about the licensing problem. The $40,000 for the Renton warehouse went somewhere, but not to any property purchase I could locate in the county deed records. I closed my laptop at midnight and sat in a dark study for a while. Then I went to the guest room door and listened. They were talking in low voices on the other side of the wall, the way people talk when they think they're being quiet. But the house is old, and the walls don't hold secrets as well as they used to. I heard Gregory say he won't notice until we're ready. I heard Renee say something I couldn't make out. Then Gregory again. Once the paperwork is filed, it doesn't matter what he notices. I went back to my study and sat down and let the meaning of those words arrange themselves into something coherent. Paperwork. Filed. It doesn't matter what he notices. They were planning something that didn't require my cooperation once it was set in motion. That narrowed the options considerably. In my career, that phrase, once it's filed, had pointed in one direction more often than any other: power of attorney. I didn't sleep that night. I made a list instead. The next morning I called an old colleague from my FBI years, a woman named Sandra Marsh who had retired to private investigative work outside of Olympia. I told her I needed a comprehensive background check on someone. I gave her Gregory's full name, Renee's name, and the name of the man in the photograph shaking my son's hand. I told her I needed whatever was a matter of public record. I also called my attorney, a man named Philip Okafor, who had handled my estate planning years ago when Margaret was alive. I told him I needed to review and potentially revise my will, and I needed it done this week, quietly. Philip didn't ask why. Good attorneys rarely do. What he did ask was whether I wanted to include a durable power of attorney clause designating someone other than an immediate family member. I told him yes. I named Sandra Marsh as my designated agent for financial and medical decisions, pending any further arrangements. Philip raised an eyebrow but wrote it down. We met that same afternoon, and I signed the documents in his conference room with 2 paralegals as witnesses. On the drive home, I stopped at a branch of my bank that I'd never used, one on the other side of Tacoma. I met with the branch manager, explained that I had concerns about potential unauthorized access to my accounts, and asked what protections were available. She was thorough and professional. Within 40 minutes, my primary checking account had a secondary verification requirement, a callback to my cell phone for any transfer over $500. My savings account was converted to one, requiring in-person authorization with photo ID. They had no idea any of this was happening. Gregory called while I was in the parking lot of the bank. I answered on the second ring. Dad, we're thinking about trying that Thai place on 6th for dinner. You in? Sounds good, I said. I'll be home in an hour. My voice came out steady. I'd had a lot of practice keeping my voice steady. Sandra called the following morning. "Arthur," she said, in the flat tone that meant the report was not going to be pleasant, "you're going to want to hear this sitting down. Gregory had a civil judgment against him in King County from 2 years ago. A former business partner had sued him for breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. The judgment was for $83,000. It had gone unpaid. Renee had a separate filing, a complaint lodged with the state licensing board by a previous employer, a property management company, alleging that she had submitted falsified expense reports over a period of 14 months. The complaint had been settled quietly, but the record existed. The man in the photograph was a notary named Craig Duffin. He had a business on the 3rd floor of the building Gregory had been photographed outside. He specialized in estate document preparation. I wrote everything down. I asked Sandra to send me the full report in writing and to keep a copy at her office. Then I went back inside and had breakfast and asked Gregory if he wanted the last of the coffee. He said yes. He poured it himself and leaned against the counter and told me he'd been thinking about my estate planning, that it might be a good idea to revisit things, that he was just concerned about making sure everything was streamlined for the future. I looked at my son across my kitchen and thought about the man he'd been when he was 7 years old, the way he'd come to me with problems he didn't know how to solve, the absolute trust in his face. I thought about what that trust was worth to him now. "You're probably right," I said. "I've been meaning to look into that." His expression didn't change, but I saw him breathe out very slightly. "Relief. I know a guy," he said. "A notary. He handles this kind of thing all the time. Makes it simple." "Set it up," I said. "I'll go." That night they were careless. I'd installed a simple digital recorder in the hallway outside the guest room 3 days earlier. After the first night, I'd heard them talking through the wall. It looked like an ordinary air freshener. I checked it each morning after they left. That night's recording ran 47 minutes. I sat in my study with my headphones on and listened to the whole thing. Gregory's voice first. "The meeting's Thursday. Duffin has the documents ready. Once Dad signs the financial power of attorney and a healthcare directive, it's done. Renee, what if he reads them carefully? Gregory, he's 71. Duffin will explain it in general terms, make it sound like standard stuff. Dad trusts people. He always has. It's his whole thing." A pause. Then Renee, and after. "Gregory, we get him assessed. I already called the place in Gig Harbor. Memory care. Once he's there, we have full control of everything. The house, the accounts, everything." Renee, quieter. "How long does something like that take?" Gregory, the assessment? "A few weeks once a doctor signs off. I have someone in mind." I took the headphones off and set them carefully on the desk. Gig Harbor, a memory care facility. A doctor who would sign off. My son was not planning to steal from me. He had already moved past that. He was planning to remove me, to have me declared incompetent and warehoused somewhere quiet, where my questions would be attributed to confusion and my objections would be dismissed as symptoms, where I would simply cease to matter. I sat in my study for a very long time. I did not allow myself anger. Anger is a flood that ruins the evidence. I allowed myself instead the cold, particular clarity that had carried me through 31 years of financial crime investigation. The clarity that comes when you understand not just what someone has done, but what they were willing to become. I called Philip Okafor at 7:30 the following morning. "I need to move some things around," I told him, "and I need to record a formal witness statement from myself regarding what I've heard and document it. I want it notarized, time-stamped, and filed with your office." "Arthur," he said carefully, "do you want to tell me what's happening?" I told him, all of it, from the anonymous index card to the recording from the night before. He listened without interrupting, which is the mark of someone who understands that the full shape of a thing matters more than the immediate response to any single piece of it. When I finished, he said, "Thursday is 3 days away." "I know," I said. "I need to be ready before then." Philip spent the rest of that week building what he called a protective perimeter. My revised will was already filed with the county recorder. My bank accounts were already secured. He drafted a formal declaration of my cognitive and legal competency, signed by my personal physician, Dr. Elaine Wu, who had been my doctor for 16 years and who did not find the request unusual once I explained the circumstances. She signed it the same day. He also contacted the Washington State Bar's Elder Law Division, which operates a fraud prevention program. They sent a caseworker to Philip's office the next afternoon, a quiet, precise woman named Miss Tran, who reviewed the recordings and the financial records and the investigator's report and said, with the understatement of someone who has seen too much of this is a significant case. I went to the meeting with Craig Duffin on Thursday. Philip came with me. I introduced him as my attorney, and I watched Duffin's composure wobble like a table with one short leg. Gregory had not expected me to bring representation. He recovered quickly, shook Philip's hand, suggested that an attorney's presence was actually great, very thorough, made everything more official. Duffin laid the documents out on his desk. Financial power of attorney, designating Gregory as sole agent, healthcare directive, naming Gregory as decision-maker for any situation involving my mental or physical incapacity. A supplementary form authorizing Gregory to act on my behalf in all real estate transactions. Philip picked up each document and read it with the particular slowness that attorneys deploy when they want someone in the room to understand that nothing is going unnoticed. Then he set them down and said pleasantly, "Mr. Covington won't be signing any of these today." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Dad, we talked about this." "We did," I agreed, "and I've decided to handle my affairs through my attorney's office instead. It's simpler that way." Duffin began gathering the papers back into a folder. His movements were too controlled. He'd done enough of these to know when one was going wrong. Gregory looked at me for a long moment. There was something in his face that I hadn't expected. Not anger, not panic, something closer to calculation. He was still trying to figure out his next move. "Fine," he said. "We can do this another time." "Of course," I said. That evening, I was in my study when I heard them arguing. The recorder caught most of it. Gregory's voice rising above the registers, he usually kept it in, saying that something had gone wrong, that I must have found out, that the old man was smarter than he looked. Renee's voice sharper than I'd ever heard it, saying she had told him she'd said from the beginning that this was too slow, too complicated, too many chances for something to unravel. 2 days later, I asked them to come to the kitchen. I poured 3 cups of coffee and set them on the table and sat down. They sat across from me. Gregory had the expression of a man bracing for something. Renee's hands were folded very still in her lap. I placed Philip's letter on the table first. Then the investigator's report, then a single piece of paper printed from the recording transcript with the relevant passage highlighted. Once he's there, we have full control of everything. The house, the accounts, everything. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Gregory said, quietly, "Dad, don't," I said. I kept my voice level. "I've heard every explanation there is for why good people do the things they've done. I spent my career listening to them. I don't need to hear yours." Renee started to say something. I looked at her and she stopped. "Here is what's going to happen," I said. "Philip is filing a civil complaint Monday morning. The recordings and financial records have been turned over to the King County DA's office as of this morning. The Elder Fraud Division is aware of the case. You have 30 days to vacate the property. That notice is already filed with the county." Gregory's hands were flat on the table. "You're reporting your own son. You tried to have me declared incompetent and committed to a memory care facility so you could liquidate my assets. That's not a family dispute, Gregory. That's a crime. I needed the money, the judgment, the debt. I was drowning. I looked at him. My son, 42 years old, sitting in the kitchen of the house he'd grown up visiting. The house where his mother and I had built everything we had, explaining that the weight of his own choices had turned him into someone who would warehouse his father rather than ask for help. You ask me for help, I said. $61,000 of help over 4 years. You chose fraud. Those were your choices. He didn't have an answer for that. They left the table without finishing their coffee. Over the following weeks, the legal architecture did what legal architecture is designed to do. The DA's office opened a formal investigation. The civil case moved through Philip's office with the deliberate efficiency of well-prepared paperwork. Craig Duffin, the notary, faced a complaint with the state licensing board once the Elder Fraud Division reviewed what he'd prepared. His relationship with Gregory turned out not to be a one-time arrangement. There were 3 other elderly clients whose names appeared in his files alongside similarly structured documents. Gregory's civil judgment from King County, the one for $83,000, was discovered by the DA's investigators and became part of the fraud pattern they were constructing. Renee's prior complaint with the licensing board added to it. The day I received confirmation that Gregory had been formally charged with attempted financial elder abuse and conspiracy, I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the light come off the water through the trees. My house in Tacoma sits on a slope that gives you a partial view of the Sound on clear mornings. Margaret had loved that view. We'd chosen the house partly because of it. I thought about her that morning, about what she would have made of all of this. She had always seen Gregory more clearly than I had. She'd once said to me, in that careful way she had of raising difficult things, that Gregory was very good at wanting things from people without them feeling wanted. I had not understood what she meant then. I understood it completely now. The 30 days expired on a Friday. I arranged to be at Philip's office when they moved out, not to avoid watching, the way some might think, but because I had learned long ago that witnessing the execution of a plan you've worked to build can produce a kind of satisfaction that clouds judgment, and I did not want clouded judgment. I wanted to be clear-eyed for whatever came next. Philip sent me a text message at 2 in the afternoon. Property clear. Locks being changed as discussed. When I returned home, the guest room was empty. The hangers in the closet swung slightly from the draft when I opened the door. On the kitchen counter, Gregory had left his house key. Just the key, nothing else. No note, no word of any kind. I picked it up and held it for a moment. Then I dropped it in the trash can by the door. I hired a woman from a cleaning service the following morning. Someone who came recommended, who worked thoroughly and without conversation, which was exactly what I needed. She spent 6 hours on the guest room and bathroom. I had the locks changed that afternoon by a locksmith named Pete, who had done work for me before and didn't ask any questions. New dead bolts, new garage code, new alarm sequence. The house felt different after. Not lighter, exactly. Quieter, in a way that was honest rather than simply empty. There is a particular quality to silence that you've chosen, as opposed to silence that has been imposed on you. I had not chosen my silence when Margaret died. I was choosing this one. Sandra Marsh called a few weeks after the eviction. She'd been named as a witness for the DA's case and wanted to let me know her testimony was ready. She also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Gregory's lawyer had approached Philip about a settlement, a plea arrangement that would likely result in probation, significant fines, and a criminal record, but no prison time, given the absence of a prior criminal history. I told Philip to let the process work the way it was designed to work. At the sentencing hearing in the fall, Gregory stood before a judge in King County Superior Court wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He'd lost weight. His attorney spoke about mitigating circumstances, about the financial pressure of the civil judgment, about Gregory's lack of a criminal record. The judge listened with the patience of someone who has heard every variation of the story that circumstances produce. The sentence was 18 months of supervised probation, $12,000 in fines, and full restitution of the $61,200 taken over 4 years. The restitution was to be paid in monthly installments. Given his current financial situation, Philip estimated it would take several years. The criminal record was permanent. Gregory looked at me once from the defendant's table, just before the judge concluded. I don't know what he expected to see. I kept my face neutral. That was all I had to offer him. I did not attend the sentencing, hoping to feel something resolved. I attended because the victim impact statement I had submitted was part of the court record, and I believed it was important to be present when it was acknowledged. It said what it needed to say, that what had been done was not merely a financial crime, that it had been a deliberate exploitation of the particular trust that exists between a parent and a child, that this trust is among the most foundational things a family has, and that its destruction has consequences no financial restitution can fully address. I meant every word of that. Some evenings, I sit on the back porch and watch the light change over the water and think about the $61,000 and what it represented, not just what it bought Gregory, which was time and gambling and debts I hadn't known about, but what it cost me. Not the money itself. I've managed my finances carefully for 30 years, and I will be fine. What it cost was the version of my son I'd been carrying in my mind. The 7-year-old who brought me his problems to solve. The young man I'd been proud of, for reasons that turned out to be partially my own construction. That's a particular kind of loss. Not the sudden loss that grief delivers all at once, but the slower kind, where you revise a thing piece by piece until what you're holding at the end barely resembles what you started with. I still drive to the hardware store on Tuesdays. I still stop for coffee at the diner on Route 9. Where they know my name. The routine holds. Routinees are useful that way. They give you a structure to fill even when the filling is harder than it was before. The house is mine again, in every sense that matters. I've turned the guest room into a proper library, the one I always said I'd build when I had the space. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls. Margaret would have liked it. I received an anonymous letter in the mail last spring. A single index card, block letters. I'm glad you listened. I don't know who sent I the card. I've thought about it, and I've decided that it doesn't matter. What matters is that somebody saw something, made a decision to act on it, and trusted that I would know what to do with the information. They were right to trust that. Whoever they are, I hope they know it made a difference. Before you go, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Ivory Vengeance. If this story touched you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We read every single one. People ask me sometimes what it feels like to realize that someone you raised, someone you watched learn to walk and read and navigate the world, has been lying to your face for years. They expect the answer to involve rage or devastation or some dramatic collapse. What I actually felt, sitting at my kitchen table with that index card in my hand, was something quieter and colder than any of that. It felt like the moment in an investigation when the pattern finally resolves, when the numbers stop being numbers and become a story, and the story is worse than you'd allowed yourself to suspect. I've thought a lot about what made Gregory capable of doing what he did. I don't think he was born that way. I think he made a series of small choices, each one a little easier than the last because the previous one had already moved the line. The first loan he asked for might have come from genuine need, but at some point, the need became a habit, and the habit became a strategy, and the strategy became a plan to take everything, including my freedom, and dress it up as concern for my well-being. That's how it works. Not all at once. Piece by piece, until the person standing in front of you isn't quite the person you thought they were. What I want to say to anyone watching this is not that family can't be trusted. It's that trust has to be grounded in something real, in actions that match words, in patterns that hold up over time, not just in the fact of shared blood. I trusted Gregory because he was my son, and I confused the relationship for evidence of character. Those are not the same thing. I know that now in a way I didn't before, and I'll carry that knowledge for the rest of my life. The thing that saved me was not cleverness, though the work I did mattered. What saved me was paying attention. Someone saw something and chose to act on it, slipped a card through a mail slot, and trusted that I would know what to do. And I had spent 31 years building the kind of mind that could do something with that information instead of dismissing it or explaining it away. Integrity isn't just about what you refuse to do to others. It's also about what you refuse to let others do to you and to the life you've built without a fight. Gregory's choices caught up with him not because the universe arranged it that way, but because choices have weight. They accumulate. They create records and patterns and consequences that don't disappear just because you prefer they did. He borrowed against every relationship he had until there was nothing left to borrow against. That's not a punishment from outside. That's just the arithmetic of a life built on taking rather than building. I still have the index card. Both of them, actually. The first one and the one that came last spring. I keep them in the desk drawer in the new library, the room that used to hold everything they thought they'd inherit. Some mornings I open that drawer and look at them and think about the particular kind of courage it takes to do a small, anonymous thing for a stranger, with no guarantee it will matter and no way of ever knowing if it did. It mattered. Whatever else is true, that much is certain.